this is Marianne Esau for EDL 851, Module 13, Case Study. So in our case study, we're going to talk about Mrs. Horton. She's a former Teacher of the Year. She has been unable to separate her work and her home life, and she's been bringing her frustrations into the classroom and supposedly taking them out on students. Parents of the students have complained, and they are very upset. So we need to figure out what we know, what we need to know, and figure out what our problem actually is. So what we know about Mrs. Wilson. Mrs. Wilson has been the principal for 3 years in this building. This is her first principal job. She is a 13-year teaching veteran, so she is not new to the profession or anything. She didn't want to rock the boat the first year, so she kind of let things kind of stay as they were the first year. This year, she has supported and implemented a new pilot program. It's a reading program for her school. The teacher we're going to talk about is Mrs. Horton. She is a former Teacher of the Year, so at least at one point, she has been highly thought of in the teaching world. This year, she has been really stressed out, less friendly. She argues with her coworkers, and she supposedly is verbally abusive to her kids. We do know that her home life is very stressful right now. Her husband has moved out, and she does have 2 teenage sons at home, so that probably adds a lot of stress in her life. She seems to have kind of checked out at this point, where she's pretty upset about things and just kind of isn't doing a very good job. And she is confrontational where she hasn't been in the past. What I need to know about Mrs. Horton is how long has she been in her current position? You know, I know she's a veteran teacher, but has she been in first grade for a long time? It might be an issue where she is new to first grade and she just doesn't do well with first grade. You know, we have to figure out when she got to that position. I want to know also, how often is Mrs. Horton evaluated? You know, she is a veteran, and so we know that she is not evaluated as much as a first-year teacher. But when was her last evaluation? Was it this current principal? Was it the previous principal? You know, just kind of knowing that would help us determine, you know, where she was at that point. I also want to know, does she have help in her room? You know, there are 3 aides in the whole building, so it doesn't seem like there's a lot of extra adults around, so that could be an issue. I also want to know how many students she has. You know, is it a normal year, or does she have a lot more? And we need to know, are her stressors job-related or personal? Yes, she does have personal issues at home, but her stress could truly be that she's burned out and she's ready to just be done. So the problem we are going to talk about is Mrs. Horton bringing her home life to work. She is stressed out, and she is said to be verbally abusive to her students, and we do know that parents and students are upset and parents have complained. So our plan of action, the first thing I would do is gather my documentation. You know, as a SPED teacher, I document everything, and I would just compile that and make sure that I knew exactly what was said, by whom, and when, and just make sure that I had that ready. Secondly, I would have a conference. I would for sure make sure our union rep is present, because that is imperative in this situation where it's not my word against her situation. I would ask her why she's acting this way. You know, she may not even be aware that she's been rude. You know, she was talked to at one point, but she might not be aware of what her students perceive her to be. I would hopefully have her examine her actions and figure out why she's doing what she's doing. And I would make sure that she knew that I cared about her well-being and her safety, as well as the students. The last thing I would do is I would make a corrective action plan if that was necessary, which, I mean, I think it is necessary at this point, because she's proven that she is not doing well over several months. Okay, so during our conference, again, I would make sure that she knows that I care about her well-being. We have, I assume, established that relationship, and so hopefully she trusts me enough to just be honest with me about what she's doing and why she's doing the things she is. I would present her with the information I collected from people and let her know about any complaints I've received, and just let her know what the issues are, because again, she might not be as aware as we think she is. Again, I would ask her what's wrong. You know, is it teacher burnout? Is it personal issues? Is it stress in the classroom? Is it one particular student? You know, what's going on? I would talk to her about productive ways to manage our stress. Maybe she just needs an outlet, and that could just be a simple solution too. Hopefully she would reflect on her actions and see her errors. With the corrective action plan, which I would implement, the first thing I would do is remind her of the district policy. What happens if she doesn't do X, Y, and Z? Then what happens? What's our next step if she doesn't do what she's supposed to? I would make sure that we would implement goals together. I want to make sure that she knows what she needs to work on, and she knows how we're going to get to a positive solution. The third thing is I would meet in the mandated time frame. In my district, I think it's 2 to 4 weeks between the start of a plan and the next time you're supposed to meet. So I would make sure that she knew what she needed to do in the time frame that was given. During that time, I would go to her classroom more often. I would do a lot more walkthroughs and just make sure that I knew what was going on. Is it an issue where students are going home and complaining just for no reason, or are they valid reasons? And I also would check on the well-being of each student in that class. Some students might feel verbally abused but not be willing or able to tell their parents. And so I would just make sure that every student in that room is feeling like their needs are met and they're feeling emotionally safe in their room. I would make sure to specifically call those 4 students that or call the parents of those 4 students that had complaints to the board, and let them know that I am aware of the situation and I am dealing with the situation, but let them know that it does take time. You can't just fire someone for having a bad few weeks. You have to make sure that you do it the right way. With Julie in particular, I would go ahead and grant her to transfer to another room. Since it's so early in the year, I would just make sure that her parents felt good about it and she felt good about it, and I would just go ahead and make that transfer. So to resolve the problem, ideally after the action plan, Mrs. Horton would see the error of her ways and turn her attitude around. But other actions would be maybe necessary. And like I said, I would make sure that I knew the district's policy on those actions and kind of go from there. If she continues in the building, Mrs. Horton needs to kind of start over with her students. 4 students complained, but, maybe more are feeling scared. Just let them know, like, adults have bad times too. Apologize to them and just be humble about it, because in my opinion, things like that go a long way in terms of forgiveness. Mrs. Horton needs to be able and willing to hold conferences with parents. The fact that she's refusing is, again, unacceptable. Parents need to see that she is making an effort to be better, that she is not content with being a poor teacher. As an administrator, I would offer her job-embedded professional development, as kind of like we discussed in class, and just make sure that she knew that she needed to kind of go through this professional development and work on some things. The thing that's best for students need to have a competent, caring teacher. They are so young, and they should not be afraid to go to school. I mean, really, no one should be afraid to go to school, but especially when you're so young. Most parents and most people in the community are pleased with the school, so it makes me think that this is an isolated event. Mrs. Horton has demonstrated that she is an excellent teacher. So if she is fired or removed, what would happen to those kids? Who would be in that classroom? Having no teacher could be worse. In my district where I live, it's hard to get teachers. And so, not having a teacher could be worse. During this time, I really felt empathetic towards the students. They are so young, like I said, and they deserve to feel safe. Again, all students deserve to feel safe, but they're so little, it just doesn't sit well with me. I also think that Mrs. Wilson should have acted sooner. She knew that this was a problem at spring break of the previous year, so she had about 9 weeks last year to deal with this and kind of hopefully alleviate some problems before this school year. Mrs. Horton could have had professional development over the summer, that she did to improve herself. I don't think that Mrs. Wilson should be afraid to rock the boat. She needs to be bold and be willing to stand up for what is right. Also during this time, I did like that Mrs. Wilson stopped the parent meeting. It was unproductive, and she could have easily said, okay, well, you took time off of work, so let's just finish. But it was really good that she stopped. I also think it's good that Mrs. Wilson did not observe any abusive behavior. She acted ethically because she did not turn a blind eye. She genuinely didn't know there was a problem until it was brought to her attention. And so, she did the right thing there. I also was kind of frustrated that the school didn't have more aides. There were only 3 aides for 18 classrooms, which I thought was kind of low. More adult supervision could help because another adult can keep you in check and just kind of, you can kind of bounce off of them and they can help you out too. Some issues that we have left unresolved. The parent-teacher relationship could be beyond repair. The students, I think, are more forgiving than parents. They will forgive and they'll forget, but parents will not. They will not forget the fact that Mrs. Horton was mean to their kid. And we need to make sure that relationship hopefully is repaired, but they might have trust issues. As a principal, I would continue to communicate with those parents and just to make sure that they feel that their kids are safe. The other issue is what happens if things do not improve. Does Mrs. Horton have to go somewhere else? Again, like I said, that's an issue where I live, where you may not have a teacher to replace her, especially 6 weeks into the school year, which to me again leads to the fact that Mrs. Wilson should have acted earlier. But who would teach that class? To reflect on the standards, standard 2 is basically about the ethical leadership and how we have to act ethically for the academic success of all students. Component 1, the success for all students, we do know that the test scores were above average. We do know that parents didn't really complain over, generally speaking, the building is seen as positive. We know that parent concerns were heard and validated, which is key for student success. And Julia was removed when requested. Well, I removed her when requested. Component 2, the personal well-being. We do know that Mrs. Wilson does visit the classrooms regularly. We assume that she doesn't just go to Mrs. Horton's room, but that she goes to all the classrooms. We know that the student and parent issues were taken seriously. They are not just something that has been glossed over. Mrs. Wilson is aware, and when she found out there was an issue, she scheduled a meeting. She does know that she does know what happens in her building, and she deals with issues when necessary. And component 3, instructional capacity. The school was chosen for a new reading program, which is great, but Mrs. Wilson needs to make sure that it's done the right way. It is a pilot program, so implementing it correctly is essential. More training, more professional development may be necessary to ensure success of the program. Mrs. Wilson does observe classrooms regularly, especially when there's a problem or concern. She has been in Mrs. Horton's room several times throughout the year. And Mrs. Wilson is available to have those difficult conversations. She has had to talk to Mrs. Horton in the past, and she is not afraid to stand up for what's right, and I think that is essential in instructional capacity and student well-being. I think that's about it. Thank you for watching.